right. Well, welcome to the VTCLA Podcast. I'm going to let our guest introduce herself in just a moment, but we're really excited to delve into the partnership between schools and the medical world and see what we can do to help our students. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are in your current position?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's really a joy. So my name is Heidi Schumacher. I'm a general pediatrician at the University of Vermont and faculty with what's called the Vermont Child Health Improvement Program, which is a long-standing partnership between the state health department, which mostly funds our work, the university, and lots of players all across the state. Our mission is really to improve the health and well-being of Vermont's kids. And therefore, by extension, families and the bigger community. So we really are statewide in nature at VCHIP. And I just came back to Vermont last year, having done medical school here. I'm the daughter of two Vermonters. And after I left the College of Medicine here at UVM, I was down in Washington, D.C. for a number of years, including leading school health there for about 7 years for D.C. government. So worked at the local level for DC Public Schools and then for DC's state education agency, including all of the COVID response stuff, which I know your listeners will be right with me in feeling that feels like 1,000 years ago and yesterday at the same time. So really, I think transformed the way we thought about sort of the intersection of health and education. But anyway, so really an incredible role down there, and it's been so fun to lean in with schools now back in Vermont. Because I think what's always resonated for me about the space of school health and schools generally is that it's all the same kids, right, that we care for in the healthcare space and that you all see in your schools, but way too rarely do we have the opportunity to sit together to understand how we can work with families together, how we can understand and support, in my case, the health stuff that might be showing up at your front door, challenging kids and families from being their best. And then in return, how can we help support you to advance the education instruction of kids? Because we know that educational attainment is one of the leading predictors of long-term health. So I think that's what most resonates for me in this space.
Thank you, Heidi. When you think about, and you spoke to this a little bit, about the mission or the purpose associated with schools. Say a little bit more about what the goals are, what the primary purpose is, and then if you can sort of transition into what are some of the things that are on your plate most presently regarding that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak primarily here about the Vermont Child Health Improvement Program, which is called VCHIP. And I can share, Mike and Jeff, with you a link if you want to get out to your listeners too. But if you just Google VCHIP, VVM, you should see it come up. But basically, as I said, our mission is really to advance the health and well-being of Vermont's kids. And as you all know, as well as anyone, in my mind, schools are the perfect place to think about partnerships, because if we're lucky, maybe kids and families come to see us on the healthcare side maybe once a year. But maybe not. And they're with you 180 days a year, theoretically. So to think, it's always struck me that we don't want to put more things on the plates of schools, of course, but to miss the opportunity to engage kids and families where they are every day would be a miss. And so I think what we've tried to do at VCHIP, and this long preceded me, but it's been fun to sort of think about shaking up strategy here in the last year since I've been back, is really to think about how do we set tables where we can bring players together from different spaces that might not often have the opportunity to do so. We talk a lot about that, setting tables, and bring together partners at the state level, but also really at the local level to wonder together about where there might be shared interest and opportunity to partner. We're an academic institution affiliated with UVM too. So can we support storytelling using data? That's a big interest of mine. And I think one of the missed opportunities often in school health is people on the health side think schools feel like something big and different. People on the school side think health seems like something big and different. But if we can interweave some data, qualitative or quantitative, that sort of proves the point I've long said: healthy bodies and minds are the foundation of academic success. And if we can use data to tell that story, when kids and families are well, when educators are well, kids learn better. And when kids learn better, they're healthier. So I think that's a space where us thinking about our convening role, our data role, and then we do a lot of hands-on work with primary care practices, in particular across the state, on all kinds of things, including around partnerships with schools. I'll stop there, but that's maybe what I would give as my opening.
That's great. That really leads into what I was wondering about. I really appreciated your point about the number of days in school and versus the visit to a medical center or a medical practitioner. That's really striking, and I've never heard it stated that way. I think that's a great way to put it. One of the things that I've always been curious about is, where do people in the medical world get information about how to support schools currently? And where do you think there's some opportunities for us to, as a state, to really do better with that?
I love this question so much, and I sort of chuckled, and I know you'd sent some questions in advance about where we might go, because the answer is it really, really, really varies. It varies. We have a strong pediatric community here. We have an incredible family practice community here too. Folks who work here have trained in institutions all across the country at different times. I'm proud to say I think many medical schools and residency programs, which are sort of the initial clinical training programs for physicians, and I'm sure the same is true for nursing programs, although I don't know the specifics as well, have tried to move toward explicitly teaching healthcare providers, especially who serve kids, about the value of partnerships, getting out of the walls of the hospital. How do you lean in with a community partner to help advance your goals for individual patients, communities, et cetera? But that's slow work. You guys know that, I'm sure, in educator programs too. That's slow work. And so where I always get excited is like where there is opportunity for folks at the local level to build relationships, to build trust, and to be willing to give thoughtful, constructive feedback to one another in individual settings. That's really where I've seen the most value. So one example we hear a lot, just did a big project on training primary care, a cohort of primary care providers to diagnose autism in their primary care clinics. And one of the things we did a lot was talk about sort of just partnering around the care of kids with disabilities between a primary care practice and a school. And right off the bat, totally expectedly, I've heard this in every community I've ever worked in, schools were saying, well, like, listen, as part of this, can someone please tell the dang doctor to stop writing the note that says this kid's need an IEP and they should get 10 hours of blank, blank, and blank in the school. And when I totally get that. When folks come in and they're saying, like, my first experience is that, like, the healthcare community is out here trying to tell schools what to do. And I'm seeing both of you guys smile. I know you've been there. We've all been there. I've seen it myself. I was the one who, like, when I first started in school health, was like, I don't think doctors do that. And then people were showing me pieces of paper and being like, what is this crap? Like, stop doing this. But I think really the opportunity then is to say instead, like, first of all, to build trust such that we assume people are working with their best intent. When I hear about a primary care doctor writing a note that says to a school, this kid needs an IEP and please give 10 hours of blah, blah, blah. That's that provider not knowing what, they don't have any idea that, and think in most cases that that's the complete wrong answer. And to be able to provide concrete tips to say, like, this is what, as a school person, I want to hear from you. This is where you can support me in my work, like practical tips. And then even by extension, like, really, is there a time once a month where we want to sit together, school person, clinic person, and talk about our kids that we have in common with all the relevant consents, et cetera, to like build some momentum in team-based care. That's, I think, where folks on both sides really learn. And that's where I have found, get more traction, even while I agree very much that on the clinician sort of training side, we need to do better in the earliest days of folks' careers.
That's fascinating. Yeah, we were both smiling because we definitely experienced those situations, but also I think, there's a realistic side to that where if you have a relationship with a pediatrician, it's often for a decade or more in Vermont, in some cases. So this is somebody that you trust implicitly. So as a parent, when you're given that advice from your primary care physician or
Yeah.
pediatrician, you're going to listen to it.
Right.
And so where do you think, like, I like the idea of having that open communication, that dialogue. What's the best way to start that between schools and doctors in the area? How can that, like, logistically, what does that look like?
Great question. A few things. And I will say again, I've worked in a number of communities outside of Vermont on school health, and this is a space where, like, I think Vermont is so well positioned to do what you're describing well, because we're relational. Everyone knows each other, because I think we're, despite all of the challenges for school funding, which are real and relevant here, I think there have been some really incredible investments to support this kind of partnership, including through what's called the school liaison role that the health department funds. So I don't know if everyone's familiar with this, but in each of the local health offices that the health department funds, there are folks called some version of a school liaison whose role is to support essentially like public health connections, including between medical homes and schools. So I think if folks aren't familiar with their Vermont Department of Health local liaison, community health liaison, or school liaison, that's a perfect person to help connect. Your school nurse is really actually where I should have started. I think that's a person who is often engaging regularly with medical homes in the area around plans of care, around asthma, around 504 plans, etc. And I think to engage the school nurse as a central part of school infrastructure, I think has lots of ripple effects, including in partnering with medical homes. If your school doesn't have a school nurse, or you aren't sure who your liaison is, the Vermont chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, or American Academy of Family Physicians, is a great space where we're doing matchmaking all the time. And I'll offer myself, Heidi Schumacher. I'm happy to give my email address. Like, if folks, I don't pretend to know everybody yet 1 year in, but I'm certainly having a lot of fun meeting folks across the state and finding that that in some cases it is true. People just really aren't quite sure where to start. But I think there are often folks, especially if you can bring in the school nurse, who may actually be positioned to help leverage a partnership that exists somewhere.
Thank you. I'd like to come back to a couple things you said, and you just spoke to it a little bit about the setting tables concept, and then also this idea of storytelling with data. Schools spend an awful lot of time trying to understand student stories to better meet their needs, particularly students who are on a particular plan, whether it's an EST or a 504 or IEP. And so where do you see your role and physicians playing a different role in that understanding and telling a story so we can better meet the needs?
I love that. I mean, I think where I would start is to wonder about the health folks in your own building already, whom could maybe be brought in more consistently. I think what I've experienced often outside Vermont, and in some cases in Vermont, is that the school nurse, say, or school-based mental health clinician is brought in if there's already a known thing, like the kid has poorly controlled asthma, or the kid is known to have pretty significant mental health challenges. And then folks say, okay, well, let's bring in the school nurse because I know they know more about the asthma. My wonder is, could those individuals be brought in more consistently as members of your team, centrally at the school or district level? Because I think their minds are going to read a story about a family or a student. Even if they don't know them personally, they may just hear the story and wonder about different things than maybe an educator would. And oftentimes they actually are partnering with that same child or family, just in a different way. So I would say my first suggestion would be to leverage the health folks that are already in the building. The second part would be to think about things like consent. So the FERPA HIPAA thing I know comes up a ton in schools, certainly comes up a lot on the healthcare side too. And what I've found working in schools is like, if there's a consistent mechanism to get consent with sort of a reason for having consent for what it would be like to bring together a team, say, and having consent up front in a proactive, supportive way, as opposed to having families feel like, why does my school only ask for my consent when there's like a problem? You know, my kid's in trouble, or they missed a ton of school, or like now I'm worried. So now I might be more defensive about giving consent rather than saying, listen, we're trying out, say, monthly team-based care meetings with your doctor's office or something. Like, we'd love to get your consent because we want to be able to support you from the very beginning to ensure a successful school year. I think like those kind of systematic process things I know are so hard, but I have found can make a big difference. And then I think the last thing I'd say is thinking about health factors on all levels, I see as an opportunity. So an example would be school attendance. Like, I think we were emailing about school attendance as a big interest of mine. And so thinking about like, as the district's attendance team, if there is one, or if they could create one, sort of looks at attendance data, thinking about like at every step along the way, how could health and social stuff be coming in here, and who are the other community partners that could sit with us to look at these data or define tiers of intervention. I think those are all the things maybe that I would offer there.
Thanks. Speaking of school attendance, that's a pretty good segue into asking you what you consider to be some of the biggest challenges facing Vermont schools in the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I'm sure I don't know a ton of the details that your folks are experiencing on the ground, but I think from what I have learned so far, sustained funding, sustainability of funding certainly comes up as like number 1 through 10, because we all know, having worked in schools for a number of years myself, like when the money flows, you feel confident leaning in on stuff that you know is important. And that's beyond sort of just the like baseline foundational stuff. If you're not sure if ends are going to meet, just like families say this every day, how can I possibly invest in something new and different and innovative if I don't know if my basic needs are met? So that's a huge one, of course. And yet I think that what inspires me there is, and I've already seen this happening all over the place, like there is so much incredible work happening already in Vermont schools, and so many extraordinary partnerships already happening in Vermont schools. And to my mind, that's the opportunity, is like, especially if funding feels unsure, how can we leverage the communities that surround schools so that schools aren't feeling like they have to do it all themselves? And yet I know, right, when we're stressed and burnt out, we like put our heads down just trying to get the work done. And so I think the more we can pick our heads up and say like, oh gosh, there's this, say, doctor across the street who's serving many of our same kids. Could we sit together and wonder, could the doctor's care coordinator also sit on some of our care teams in the school? Could we like do things together instead of doing things in parallel? I think that's maybe what I would offer. And I actually think school attendance is a really, really, really nice place to anchor some of those partnerships, because it's so concrete and tangible. I'm happy to speak more about that, but I think I find that to be a really exciting potential anchor for partnership.
Yeah, thanks. I was wondering, from your perspective, and certainly COVID was a life-altering experience in many ways, and educational altering experience. So what are some of your observations about what do schools need to know about health and mental health that maybe we don't quite get right now, or we aren't quite appreciating?
It's a great point. Thank you for asking it. I mean, I think I'd start by saying, again, kids are their whole, as schools know better than anybody, kids are their whole selves, no matter whether they're in the school building or at home. And I think as we've thought as public health universes about the crisis of youth mental health and other scary things. I always try to say, listen, like the kid, who's sitting in your math class, who's not engaged, not performing, we're never going to get, they can have the best instruction on the earth. And in so many cases in Vermont, they do. And yet until we're able to think about, address, support that underlying health or mental health child or family factor, I should say too, right? Families' mental health in particular is really showing up a lot now. We're not gonna be able to achieve the academic goals that we want to. So I think that's, and COVID taught us that, right? When kids were out of school for 10 days because someone sneezed like at the grocery store next to them, there's no way that schools could keep up. There's no way, right? And I think we learned a lot about what it means to partner, what it means to try to communicate that intersectionality there. So I guess what I would say is, what we learned is that health is central. Again, we in my old team, we used to say healthy bodies and minds are the foundations of academic success. I think I really felt that during COVID. And then I started to feel, even like just as things were starting to reopen, already people were like going back almost to the like, okay, but that was a COVID thing. Now we got to get back to like teaching. And again, in my mind, like the instruction will always be terrific because we have incredible educators and school leaders and teams, but keeping the centrality of health and well-being, I think feels like a really important, hard opportunity, but one where I hope folks feel like the healthcare community really wants to lean in with you. I think we're trying to just figure out the best ways we can coach folks to do so. And I really encourage, if you're listening and you're someone in a school feeling like you're not sure really where to start. Again, VCHIP wants to be a resource for you. The health department wants to be a resource for you. But I also think first and foremost, like folks in your building who are thinking about health a lot, I think maybe really great thought partners there. And I should say too, just so that folks know, we're doing a ton of engagement on the pediatric side around this exact thing, school attendance in particular. The National Academies of Medicine and the American Academy of Pediatrics are calling, how cool is this? I love this. School attendance a pediatric vital sign. So, right, a vital sign like a fever, heart rate, blood pressure, right? You think about that, you're saying like, oh, this kid has a fever. Maybe I'm trained as a doctor. Maybe they have an inflammation or an infection under it. Let's like use the fever to maybe help us uncover and dig a little bit. And now we're trying to say like missed school could be that same thing. And so how can we really inspire folks to take action on the clinical side because they're using things like missed school, maybe to trigger an underlying health or social factor that the clinical team might be really well positioned to actually help address, but even better positioned to help address if they're doing it in partnership with the school.
Thank you. I love that, the vital sign piece.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it speaks also to your storytelling element. The
Yes.
data around attendance is extremely ripe for storytelling. Can you talk about a project that you personally are really excited about moving forward in the next year or two in Vermont?
Yes, very much. I saw this question in the prep and I was thinking, how do I distill down and just pick one? Because there's so many. I think one, I'm not going to speak in detail. I'm going to do two, if that's okay. 1.5. Thanks, projects. My teaser thing, which I'm not going to talk about in detail, but I'm super excited about. We do a statewide quality improvement project, we call it, with primary care teams that are part of our network. And this year, our focus is on social media and youth well-being. So that's especially around sort of working with primary care teams on how can you engage in a strengths-based way young people and their families in your clinic around social media, explore how that impacts the young person's mental health, et cetera. And one of those strands is really thinking about enhancing partnerships with schools, because we know social media and sort of screen time, phone use shows up a ton in schools. So there's a ton there. We're just getting started on that project. It kicks off more next month, but that's one I'd love to, if we can do a follow-up conversation on. And the other one I think which relates, is really around strengthening medical home school partnerships. The data strand is part of that. Medical home school nurse partnerships are part of that. We're applying as we speak for some grant funding to support a few local communities with partnerships around school attendance in particular. So I think there's a lot related to sort of engaging the health sector, especially at the local level, in the potential partnerships with schools, that is really getting me excited.
Thank you. And so we like to close the podcast, giving the guests an opportunity to do a shout out to somebody who's been influential in their own career path. So here's your opportunity.
Thank you. Yes, I think the shout out that I was thinking about, there are so many incredible people I met since coming back to Vermont last year and leading into the school space. But I think the group that I would call out is Jason DiGiulio, the leader of Hazen Union School, and his incredible team, and the partnership that they've continued to foster with their local health center, Hardwick Area Health Center. They've really leveraged their community schools infrastructure to enhance partnerships with the health center. They're standing up a school-based health center. They're thinking really collaboratively around other partners that could support them in advancing their academic goals. I've just learned a ton from them. I'm so inspired every time I talk to them, and I think they're a great model for how partnerships, including between schools and healthcare, can really advance outcomes for kids and families.
That's awesome. So I can imagine some of our members listening to this and wanting to reach out to learn more about what that partnership looks like. And also you mentioned earlier about sharing some resources with us that we can then put in the episode notes. So please do so.
I will.
Would greatly appreciate that. We've really enjoyed our time here. This was pretty illuminating, at least for me. So I want to thank you for taking your time out of, I'm sure, a very busy life to address that we talked about here today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's such a privilege.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Appreciate it.
Take care.